Just to underline, folks, this 2 hours is really meant to be focused on your wellness and self-care. You may choose to share some of this information, which honestly, and I'm going to make a statement about this in just a minute, honestly, everything that we're going to cover here is not new. But what is new is that we are in a learning community together of 52 people, and we are looking at this information and we are being reminded of self-care and wellness, your self-care and wellness for this 2 hours. I will throw out one other thing, and I'm absolutely basing this on some of what people have typed in the chat already, but I'll throw this out for your consideration. What I will throw out for you to consider is that Jordan, did you want to say something? No, okay. I just see that you unmuted. And if you do, go right ahead. But what I will say in regard to this 2 hours is that this 2 hours is meant to be for you and for us together as a learning community. Now, some people have typed in the chat, oh, I'm not able to turn on my camera, not turn on my camera because, I'm at work and I'm meeting with a client. Well, that would be called multitasking. And again, no judgment about multitasking. I'm glad you're here. But what I'm going to invite you to consider, and I'll throw this out for your consideration for some, hey, you look good to see you again. And I will invite you to focus on this in terms of as we engage in this learning community conversation together. There are 55 of us here now. Is that how much of this 2 hours actually belongs to you? How much of it are you actually in control of? In the sense of, are there demands on you to be multitasking? And what does that mean in terms of your self-care and your wellness? So what I'll invite you to consider, and consider to the degree that you can, for our 2 hours together. And I will acknowledge, I have a luxury here because I have the privilege and the opportunity of being the facilitator of this learning community conversation. So that means that as the facilitator, I can exclusively focus on our conversation and our being in this learning community together for the next a little less than 2 hours. I want to acknowledge you may not have that luxury. What I would invite you to consider, though, is as much as you can claim this time as yours, as just as the part of the process of engaging in focused dialogue around a particular topic, and specifically this topic of self-care and wellness for all. So before we take care of a couple of logistics, and there are now 60 of us in the learning community, I want to again extend a warm welcome back to anybody who has rejoined the learning community. And I want to extend a warm welcome to anyone who may be new to the learning community. Today, we are going to spend this 2 hours focusing on self-care and wellness for all. And that all is emphasizing you at this particular moment. My name is Paul Warren. I am currently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. I'm also very fortunate to be a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And as many of you know, that means that there are times when I'm absolutely forced to go to Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, and St. Croix to deliver training. I haven't been forced in a really long time, so don't be jealous. It's okay, Brandy. I haven't been in a while.
I was gonna say that doesn't sound like the worst thing ever to be forced to do.
You know something? You're right. and what I can tell you, specifically tell you, Brandy, and tell the whole learning community, is that the first time I was forced to go to Puerto Rico, was in the month of February after a 15th snowstorm. So when I arrived, exactly, when I arrived in Puerto Rico, it was like 75 degrees, and I jumped in the water and went swimming later that day. But let me tell you, folks, that was many years ago. Sorry to say. I'm very, very happy to be here. Oh, wonderful. That's excellent. Your island, wonderful. A beautiful, heavenly island is the island of Puerto Rico. And very, very happy to have had the opportunity to be there a few times. Once training, a couple of other times on my own dime. Well worth it. Well worth it. The other thing I'll just say by way of brief introduction, folks, is that I began my social service career in 1991, providing direct care to people living with HIV and AIDS. And I did that for a little over 12 years until about 2003, where I made a transition into predominantly focusing on training and curriculum development and workforce development, specifically for the substance use disorder field. So, yeah, so Brandy says, I was born in 92. Okay, well, Brandy in 91, I began providing direct care to people living with HIV and AIDS. And let me assure you, Brandy, I did not do that from a cradle. I did it as a full-grown adult. What I can report to you, though, is that at that time in 1991, I had not yet turned 30 years of age. I wasn't yet 30, but I was definitely an adult and out of college. And Brandy, thank you so much for reminding me of that.
I was just trying to point out that you know your stuff. You have your experience.
Okay, all right, excellent. That is what you'd call a reframe, and that was beautifully executed. I cannot tell you how happy I am actually to be here on this Friday in November to have the opportunity for us to focus on self-care and wellness. I'm going to share my screen and we'll take care of a couple of logistical details. And before I do that, I do want to throw out a question for all of you to ponder while we take care of these sort of logistical details. And this is the question. And I want to repeat something that I said before. Some of the strategies that we are going to talk about in terms of self-care and wellness, some of these strategies, in fact, I'm going to venture to guess that all of them are things that just about every one of the 61 of you here in this learning community today are familiar with. And that you may actually be engaging in and actually carrying out and doing. So what I'm going to ask you to ponder, and then we'll discuss it before we dive kind of into some terminology, but what I'm going to ask you to ponder is if we're not really going to talk about anything new, in addition to getting the 2 hours of credit that you'll get from staying until the end, what is the benefit of our being in this learning community of 61 strong? What is the benefit of our being in this learning community together today, focusing on this particular topic, reviewing, revisiting, and reconsidering strategies that we might be very familiar with or might already be engaging in? So that's what I'm going to ask you to ponder. What is the benefit of our coming together to focus on these particular strategies? And again, I'm going to ask you to ponder that. And then maybe Julie, since you typed those 3 R words in the chat, if you'd be willing, after we take care of the logistics, maybe you'd be willing to unmute if you're able. That was me crossing my fingers. You might be willing to unmute and say a little more about those 3 R words. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. We'll take care of a couple of logistics, and then I'm going to come back to this question that I'm asking you all to ponder. We have a little bit of a robust agenda for today because there are a couple of things I want to review, and then there are a couple of things I'd like us to do together as a learning community. And again, we'll get to what we can, but I want to assure you, you will get a copy of these slides that you are free to use and share in any way that supports you or any of your colleagues in your work. So I'm going to share my screen at this particular moment. And I'm going to ask everybody to just please use your chat to type the letter Y in the chat if you can see the title slide that says self-care and wellness for all. If you can see that, I'm hoping that I'm going to see 64 Ys, not the word Y, but the letter Y in the chat. Okay, good. So people can see it. Fantastic. All right. Perfect. So thank you again for being here, folks. This is our focus. Important acknowledgement to make in regard to our funder and a disclaimer. What we talk about, because we're a learning community of now 66 people, what we talk about in our learning community is really intended and meant to be of value and relevant to what you're actually doing and to your real experience. Because of that, because we have the latitude to be real and to keep it real, what we talk about may or may not necessarily reflect the official positions of the funder or views of the funder. And that's perfectly okay, because we are funded to provide relevant and supportive learning community conversations. As we engage in this conversation, it's important to consider, because there are 66 of us, and we were up to 66, but now we're down to 64. I hope nobody got thrown off. Maybe they'll be able to relog back in. But as we engage in this conversation, it's important for us to consider and be intentional that words actually have power, and that what we say and say to each other and how we say it to each other actually makes a difference. So what I'm going to ask is that all of us will consider as kind of an overarching guideline for our communication today is that we intentionally use language that is respectful, inclusive, and welcoming to all 65, possibly 66 of us that are in the learning community today. In addition to that, I do want to say welcome again with an exclamation point written in PowerPoint, and welcome back to those of you who've been here before. If you have not yet done so, please make sure that you type your name, your full name, and where you're from, and the names of anybody you may be sharing your computer with who is going to be receiving credit for this learning community conversation for their participation, because that is the timestamp of that you are here at the beginning. Zoom is very good at monitoring your participation and your presence. We do need you to type your full name and where you're from in the chat, though, so please do that. There will be a brief evaluation at the end. Your feedback is welcome, important, and valuable to me personally. I'm going to ask you to take the time to fill out that brief evaluation. Once we receive that, we'll send you your 2 hours of credit on a certificate, and we will send you a copy of these slides. I will do my best, and I'm crossing my fingers as I say that, I'm going to do my best to leave time at the end, a few minutes at the end, for you to actually complete the survey. Sometimes I'm more successful at that than others, but I will do my best because I know it's Friday and we will conclude promptly at 4, no matter where we are. A couple of guidelines in addition to the words we use. You may or may not recall when you registered for this learning community conversation, you actually agreed to have a working camera and a working microphone. Now, a couple of people have already mentioned to me that for whatever reason, they're not able to turn on their cameras. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for letting me know. I respect that. If you're able to turn on your camera, please turn on your camera and be on camera for the full duration of our conversation. What I would ask is that if you wouldn't mind, unless you absolutely have something you want to say or add or question or underline, and that can be at any moment, if you're not in that particular position where you have something you want to add, say, did somebody want to comment? No?
Yep.
Yeah, go
Trying to
ahead.
activate my camera, so it's gonna be a moment before
Not a
figuring out
problem.
the
Yeah,
resource.
not a problem. You take your time, do what you need to know. It's good to know that your microphone is working, and thanks for letting me know that. And I will also underline, folks, that's a great example because if there is something you want to question, comment on, add information to, don't hesitate to unmute. I don't mind, as I just demonstrated. I don't mind being interrupted. What I would ask, though, is if Holly, Margaret, or Paula have the floor and they're making a comment, please don't interrupt them. Please let them finish. Let Holly, Margaret, or Paula finish, and anybody else in the learning community. Let them finish making their point. And then if you want to add something, question something, comment on something, feel free to unmute and do so. What I would also invite all of us to consider is that listening, especially when you disagree or have a different experience or have a different value or belief to what somebody's saying, we are a learning community of 65 people. The goal is not for us all to be on the same page. The goal is for us to be in a respectful, supportive, focused learning community. And then the last guideline that I would ask everybody to consider is speaking from the I. Now, before I touch on these disclaimers, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and I'm just going to ask, and if I can't see you, if your camera's not activated for whatever reason, you can type your agreement in the chat. But what I'm going to ask is, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? And you can wave, nod, directly deposit to my checking account. I'm putting the number in the chat. No, I'm not. I'm not really going to do that. You don't have to deposit to my checking account. You can type what yes in the chat. You can type I agree. Thank you, Bo. I agree. Oh, look at that. Multiple thumbs up. Fantastic. Love that. Rayleigh, that's pretty amazing. Oh, Megan's doing the same thing. Fantastic. All right, good. So those are our guidelines. Understood, Rebecca. Thanks for letting me know. I'm just glad you're here. And maybe you're able to unmute. I'm not positive, but if you are, that would be great. All right. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, and let's review a couple of more disclaimers and then the learning objectives, I believe. So it's really important, I think, with this particular learning community conversation for me to acknowledge my role, which is that I'm here as a facilitator. This is an opportunity. It's an invitation for all 66 of us to consider, assess, and explore how self-care activities currently fit into our lives or could fit into our lives, and our own personal conception and experience of wellness. I'm not here to hand Margaret her prescription of what her wellness should be. Just so you know, Margaret, that's not why I'm here. Margaret knew that already.
Glad to hear it.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. She's very glad to hear that. All right. Thank you, Margaret. So that's not why I'm here. I'm here to create a space where we can collectively, as a focused learning community, consider, assess, and explore. Also, the purpose of this conversation really is to support and affirm what you're currently doing and to help you in your consideration if there's anything else you're considering or would want to consider or add to enhance or build on what you're already doing to support and promote your wellness. Okay, so very important to be very clear about that up front. I don't have anybody's answers, and I'm not going to pretend in my role as facilitator that I do. Also, this again is a supportive learning community, an opportunity for us to reflect on self-care and wellness, and I will underline to engage in some what I call micro self-care activities as a learning community. And for you to be also thinking about if you have any next steps for your own professional wellness. Now, of course, your wellness, your well-being, and your self-care are related to your personal life equally. Our focus is really an attempt to focus on your professional wellness. Again, I want to acknowledge that there's probably an inextricable link between the two, understatement of the century. And I just want to acknowledge that. Again, and thank you, folks. Thank you so much for sending me your private messages, letting me know what's going on. We are going to review the golden rule, and we're going to get to that in a moment. I remember the question that I'm asking you to ponder. Don't forget that. We're going to come back to that. We are going to talk about something called the stress cycle, and we are going to walk through a completed stress cycle and what is referred to as a modern day stress cycle. We will also talk about a micro activity, which is called taking a pause. Some people call it by other names. And then we will also talk about the acronym HALT, H-A-L-T, in the context of self-care and wellness. Again, something I'm sure many of the people in the 67 of us in our learning community are quite familiar with. Now, before we get to these terms, and we'll take a little bit of time looking at 3 particular phrases. Brandy's asking, what was the question that I asked you to ponder? Brandy, thanks for asking that because I'm about to repeat it. The question that I asked you to ponder, and I think I'm going to just quickly check the chat because I think it was somebody whose name begins with an L. I could be wrong. Who answered the question. I'm looking for it in the chat because I'm going to invite that person to be the first person. Yep, it was not an L at all. Julie. It has an L, but it's not. So Julie, if you're able to unmute, you'll decide, but I'm going to invite you. The question that I ask is if we're really not going to be looking at some earth-shattering new information, what is the benefit of our coming together as a learning community in this brief 2-hour period to intentionally focus on wellness and self-care? So Julie, the floor is yours. And we'll see if you are able to unmute. I think you are able to. There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very joyful and grateful to be here sharing in this community space again and with Mr. Paul. For me, simply put into words, what came to mind was that review, renew, refresh. And for me, like you pointed out, we might be familiar with the subject, with the topic. We might learn it in other webinars or school. But for me, always, the learning is a lifelong process. So maybe at some point and my experiences and my perspective and my circumstances have changed. So I'm going to take this opportunity to maybe renew those concepts, adapt it maybe to the colleagues here or partners. We're going to share new experiences and we can adapt that or integrate it. Maybe there's something that we can pick up today. And like in my experience, some things have changed. We have in America, we have the new political, experience that we had. So maybe this will be a good opportunity. And also in my own experience, I went through a hurricane recently, Milton. So maybe it's a time to renew and refresh all that. So I'm just happy and grateful to be here sharing with all of you.
Thank you, Julie. And, one particular thing I want to underline, and then I want to invite anybody else who'd like to unmute. And Brandy, I don't know if now that I've repeated the question, I'm not sure if you want to respond to it, but floor is going to be open in just a minute if you do. And anybody else, of course, as well. But Julie, there's something that you said that I really think brings a deep insight into the benefit of our coming together like this. And it seems so relevant to the work we do as caregivers or helpers. is that there's always change. Things are always changing, and the need to reevaluate, renew, refresh, review. And the other thing that you said, Julie, that I really, really want to underline too, is the idea that there's great insight and wisdom to be gained from other people doing this work. And it's possible that you might hear Holly say something that it hits you in a way that is going to take you to another place in terms of your own wellness or your own self-care. So thank you so much for starting us off. I see that Margaret has raised her hand. So Margaret, I'm going to hand you the floor, and then we'll see if anybody else would be willing, which includes everybody in the learning community. But if there's anybody else who'd be willing to comment what came to mind when I asked you that question. Margaret, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what was just shared. And so I'm in a consultation group of other therapists, other counselors, and we've been able to together just process some of the feelings of the political landscape in the past few weeks. And as therapists, we're engaged in a lot of emotions get stirred up and down with the clients we're working with.
Yeah.
And so we've shared resources of different continuing education for specifically this time, this socio-political time that we're in, and we're finding them valuable. So we're helping each other in that way. And for me personally, in terms of self-care, usually I depend a lot on exercise. And having sustained an injury, I am precluded from all my things that I like to do physically. And so it's just being reminded that, when one way of coping and practicing self-care is not available, that there are then other ways to practice self-care and to be open to hearing others' experience about what that could look like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And again, the idea of the ability to pivot when necessary, because maybe an avenue that we're familiar with is temporarily not available to us. Thank you. Thanks so much. Anybody else willing to unmute and comment on this? I see that Camille wrote in the chat, increase professional effectiveness, better work-life balance, better client outcomes. Absolutely. I mean, that could almost be the title of the course in some ways. And Leroy wrote, change is the only thing in life that is constant. Leroy, absolutely. That we can absolutely bank on, especially doing this work, that there's going to be change somehow. Jennifer, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
I really think the benefit to us doing it in this space is that what works for me and what has worked for me in the past may not necessarily work for me tomorrow, but I might hear something in here that tomorrow I'll be able to say, that was a really good point. Let me try that one and see if that works today.
And Jennifer, what you just said connects so clearly to what Julie started us off with, and also what Margaret shared about the need to pivot sometimes. And Julie writes, I'm with you, Margaret, rehab from an injury. Okay. Rebecca wrote in the chat, can't care for others until you care for yourself. Okay. And Jeremiah has typed, excellent. So Jeremiah, thanks for being here. And the learning community is now up to 69 strong. Fantastic. And if we can, let's hear from one additional person. Is there anybody else who'd be willing to unmute and comment on the question that I asked you to ponder? The benefit of being in this learning community together. Anybody willing to unmute and comment on that at this particular moment? Out of the 60, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
That can't care for others until you care for yourself is true.
Please.
Not just the reason I wrote that is because what works for me for self-care may not work for others. So coming together in this community, I can learn other people's methods, and maybe that might help me out with my clients at some point.
Mhm.
Because like I said, if I'm suggesting something and they're like, oh, that didn't work for me, there may be
Mhm.
something that I learned here today that would work for them.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for elaborating on that. Riley, go right ahead. Yeah.
So I don't primarily work like with any form of clients, but I do work in schools. And so I think obviously, with how self-care is such like a wide variety of things you can do and like what all falls under that, I feel like being able to teach kids and having that conversation about that, obviously they're the next coming generation. And so, creating an environment where, new adults feel like they can, sorry, my dog is in my room right now, but so I just feel like, giving youth the tools to be able to cope and help with self-care and whatnot can kind of help them become stronger emotionally and mentally.
Absolutely. Because they have tools that they can cope with, they can call on. Yeah, absolutely. So Jordan writes in the chat, contentment and happiness are separate ideas. Happiness is an immediate relief, while contentment involves gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jordan. Holly writes, it's good to be reminded of self-care tools you may have forgotten about. Now, Holly, it's so interesting that you wrote that in the chat because you prompt me to want to poll the entire group at this particular moment because we do have 69 people in this learning community. Diana, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I think one of the things about this group is that each one teach one. We all can learn or hear something somebody's doing that might help us in what we're trying to do as far as self-care and wellness is concerned.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, I just want to read what Jennifer wrote in the chat, and then I'm Holly, I'm inspired to poll the entire group based on what you and other people have just said. But Jennifer wrote, it can also help to normalize that we also need help and need support. Sometimes as clinicians or caregivers, there's a stigma that I know how to help other people and shouldn't need help for myself. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has that experience. And I mean, what I can tell you, and Jennifer, I'm gonna make an I statement here. I think in some ways I've internalized that idea as a helper. That I'm supposed to be helping other people, I don't necessarily need help myself. And what I can tell you from my career that that started before Brandy was born, that my career, my social service career, actually, I have had many instances where I needed the help of my supervisor, my colleagues, mental health professionals, being involved in my own process of therapy and growth, as a helper, also getting help. So I just want to underline it. And Jennifer, I really appreciate that you put in this idea that there can be a stigma that we might think we're susceptible to, or that people may look at us differently if we ask for or if we say we need help. So thanks for putting that in. Eileen writes, stepping out of autopilot and refreshing self-care tools. And I really appreciate the acknowledgement of autopilot. It's easy to go on autopilot. And Zinner writes, I once had a client tell me, I never thought about or realized that therapists can have problems with their own families or kids too. And you know something? You may think like, yeah, isn't that amazing that the client would never think that? Well, the reason the client never thinks that is because we have professional boundaries. And we don't let those things intrude, hopefully, on our ability to provide care. And that's such a good example of why self-care and wellness are so critical, so we can maintain those professional boundaries. Holly, are you able to unmute?
Yes.
Would it be okay if I asked you a question?
Sure.
Okay. So I mentioned that you and others have inspired me to want to poll the entire group.
Okay.
So my question to you is, do you have any hunch about what question I may want to pose to the entire learning community based on what you and others have said?
Well, I suppose if I were to guess,
Which is what I'm inviting you to do.
then I would say, what are some of the self-care tools you use?
Holly is clairvoyant and able to read my mind. Holly, that's it exactly. And what I'm going to ask everybody to consider, and again, you're free to participate to the degree that's right for you. But what I'm going to ask everybody to consider is think about, and Margaret, I'm also thinking about what you and others have said, that we may have a leading process or set of behaviors that we engage in that we may or may not always have access to. You know, if we're recovering from an injury, we can't necessarily go out and jog if that was our main means. But what I'm going to ask everybody to consider, and I'm going to ask you to consider it from this moment, is what is a self-care practice or activity that you currently engage in that works for you? A self-care activity that you currently engage in that works for you. And I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat. Okay. I play my bass guitar. Eileen says gratitude. Mimi says spa day. Going to the gym. Exercise, spiritual health, AA and NA meetings, going for walks, walk, journaling, bath, walking, video games, nature walks, micro meditations, hot tub, gym, pedicure, reading, meditations, running, reading, knitting, sewing, crocheting. I'm going to type one in the chat that works for me. And again, I'm asking everybody to type at least if you want to. Again, feel free to participate to the degree that feels playing with my cat. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to type one in. Bodybuilding, playing my instrument, mindful breathing, writing poetry. I'm still reading some of these. I build Legos, reading my Bible. Thank you, Nick. Julie, laugh. Excellent. Eula writes, at 2 p.m., my chime goes off from the Calm app that makes me stop and spend time for myself then. Okay. Spending time with friends. Excellent. Okay, I don't know if anyone put this in the chat, but this is one that, and you're not going to be surprised by this, and I'm going to repeat it again. Camille writes, Bible journaling, playing with my cat, family time, talking to my mom, prayer. Carmen writes, gym, pedicure. Valerie writes, spending time with clients. Yeah. Tefa writes, gym, crafting, Bible time. Carmen writes, reading. And now I'm typing mine in the chat. Now, you'll notice that there was taking time out for me, shopping, music, and hot showers. Being here, Julie writes. Oh, Julie, thank you so much. Your check is in the mail. It's a very small check, though. Sorry. Samantha writes gardening. Dottie writes reading and music. Okay. So the thing I want to acknowledge here, folks, is you'll notice that there are some things that are repeating, and then there are some things that are very individual and very unique. And it's important, I think, to pay attention to that. Look for the themes and also acknowledge the uniqueness. Okay? And I will go so far as to say, like I said in the beginning, as the facilitator of this learning community conversation, I am not here to tell anyone what their wellness or what their definition of wellness and self-care should be and what their activities. I am here to help facilitate a conversation so that we can all focus on that together. I'm going to share my screen now because there are three phrases that I'm going to share with you, and then I'll invite anybody who would like to unmute and comment on the relationship or your understanding of these three phrases. Okay? And I'll just acknowledge that we're still getting some more things in the chat. Camille just wrote, was the last person to put something in. Breathing work is super helpful too. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share these three phrases with you, and then I'm just going to ask. Nick writes, doing these things, 5, 6 things I've done well. 1 or 3 things to work on. 3 or 4 things I'm grateful for. Mood check. 1 in 10 thinking. 1 goal for the day. That Nick, that almost sounds like sort of a plan and a process kind of mixed together for you. And thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm sharing my screen now, and my hope is that everybody can see this. All 70 of us can see this. So the first term is burnout. The second is compassion fatigue. And the third is vicarious trauma. I'm going to repeat those, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm just going to ask, what is your thought about the relationship between these 3 terms, and what is your reaction or understanding about these 3 terms? And I'll repeat them: burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma. Yeah, go ahead, Riley. Floor is yours.
So I feel like, can you actually put the terms back up again? Because I
sure can. I sure can.
But so basically it seems like a lot of these are connected in terms of, I mean, specifically the last 2, I feel like are more connected with your relationship with other people. So like I experience compassion fatigue because I constantly feel like I want to help everyone with their problems. And sometimes, always being like the fixer of other people's issues, or living vicariously through other people and like really taking on other people's experiences can really wear you down emotionally. I guess when I think of burnout, I just think of like standard like work burnout, or not doing too much for one thing and not focusing on yourself. So I guess like to me, the way that the 3 of them are connected is just that you're not removing yourself from things that are happening around you necessarily. Like you're living in your experiences and not in your own body in a way. So it's like all of these things are happening to you rather than, you being able to take control of how you're reacting or processing things.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for starting us off. Anybody else? Thoughts, reaction? Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Brandy. For sure.
I think that one of the 3 things that they have in common would be, if you have a self-care routine, you're not really at jeopardy more or less than you would be if you didn't, to those 3 things.
Okay. So the self-care routine or the activities that you engage in are almost a preventive process or tool to keep you from these 3 things.
Correct.
Fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, go ahead, Tracy, the floor is yours.
No, I agree with what they were saying. I also believe that there's times you have to really walk away and realize that you can't save the world. Your purpose is there to empower, to enrich, and to enhance. Once you give the client the tools, all you can do is say, I've done my best. I'm not Superwoman. We have to, I believe we can't keep doing that because you burn out, you lose yourself, and sometimes you yourself may become a victim of the system itself.
Okay. Tracy, thank you. Any other comments? Anything else that anybody would say about burnout? Yeah, go ahead, please, go ahead. Oh, Christina, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
I think it's very important to recognize when you're feeling these, these feelings, but also being able to disengage and be present when you're at work and you're with your clients. But if you can really work on, and it's definitely work, to not take it home, to not use your off time, making calls, answering emails. I mean, people hardly go on vacation anymore, right? A lot, we're work, work, work. And for me, I love my job. I absolutely love my job, but I work my 8 hours, I get my work done, and then I am in my own time. And that's what I feel like keeps me from burnout and the vicarious trauma. I don't have much to say about that. I'm sure lots of other people do, but yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay. Thanks, Christina. And I want to link what you said to what Brandy said earlier, because you really kind of also laid out another element of a self-care plan, which is setting a boundary and maintaining and keeping the boundary between work and life so that you're not as susceptible to possibly burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma. Margalie, the floor is yours. Go right ahead. And then I see people have put a number of things in the chat, so I hope you're looking at the chat. Go ahead, Margalie, the floor is yours. I see that you're unmuted. It looks like you're frozen now, but maybe that will pass. No, I think you're still frozen. So while Margalie is working on that, is there anybody else who wants to unmute and say anything about those three terms? So let's take a look at a little bit. I'll start with what just came in at the end. Margalie, I hope that you're going to be able to solve that so we can hear your voice. Camille writes, burnout is emotional, mental and physical exhaustion, and can put you at high risk for vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. Okay, so you're sort of even suggesting sort of a trajectory that one can kind of lead to or build the way for the next. Taifa writes, neglect of self not only pertains to work, but some take. Yeah, go ahead, Margalie. Let's see if the unmute works here. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Sorry about that, guys. My phone
Yeah.
just me out.
Perfect. Go right ahead.
So I just want you guys to there's another perspective about the burnout and the compassion fatigue and various. And I think about someone who is escaping themselves and they throw themselves into work, so it's like a double whammy because you're not working with working out what's going on with you. And then you're jumping, you're putting yourself into some other space and just going, running away from yourself. So therefore, and that is like a double whammy for all of these symptoms.
Fantastic. Thanks, Margalie. And I'm really glad you were able to get your audio working. Holly writes, they are signs that I am putting others before myself, probably more than is healthy for me. Which reminds me, I don't know what made me think of this, Holly, but it always comes up when we have this learning community conversation, is the video that you're always shown on an airplane. Put your oxygen mask on before you assist somebody else with putting their oxygen mask on. So if your oxygen mask is not on, it's going to make it pretty challenging for you to help somebody do the same thing. So I want to throw a couple of things out in regard to these three sort of conceptions: burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. And then I very much would welcome your reactions, thoughts, and elaborations on these. So what I would throw out for your consideration is that you can think of these three as on a continuum. And burnout may be some of what you first start to become aware of. And burnout is, I'm overwhelmed. I don't have enough time. The boundaries between work and life and my work life and my personal life are starting to get a little bit kind of fuzzy. And I'm feeling kind of an emotional exhaustion. Okay. Now, so that would be what I would add to what we've already talked about in terms of burnout. Okay. And, there may be things that I can do that directly address burnout. Then we'll move to compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue can mean, as many of our colleagues said, that all of a sudden, as I'm interacting with the patient, the participant, the consumer, the client, I'm finding it really hard to stay open and empathic to what's going on with them. And what I really want to do is just tell them what to do and get to the next situation. And it becomes more challenging to be present with the person. And I will link this to what Margalie said earlier because I think there's insight into this. The idea too that compassion fatigue almost is the sign of that you're becoming defensive against what's coming at you because it's too overwhelming and you don't have anything left to give. Now, don't misunderstand me, folks. That doesn't mean you've done something wrong. That doesn't mean you're a bad worker or a bad clinician or a bad peer. It simply means you're a human being, and all human beings have their limits. And then let's move to vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma can occur when you are repeatedly exposed to the stories and the traumas that our patients, clients, and consumers experience on a daily basis. And vicarious trauma can actually lead to a detachment from your personal life and a desire to kind of escape or avoid your work life, where you can actually begin to lose interest in anything that's not work related and you dread anything that is work related. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and just ask if anybody has any thoughts or reactions to what I've added in regard to burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma. Any thoughts, any reactions to what I've kind of folded into the mix there? Yeah, go ahead, Margaret. The floor is yours.
Well, I'll just add that I found it interesting that the World Health Organization recognized burnout in recent years. I think it's the last 2 years, whereas we haven't yet in the US. The DSM does not have burnout. So I hope we could get up to speed and really recognize it as such.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason for us to be having this conversation as well. Because there could be people in this learning community who are currently experiencing burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma. Caroline, the floor is yours.
I thought it was interesting that you kind of talked about them as is it working?
Yeah, it is working now.
I'm sorry. I thought it was interesting that you were talking about those three things sort of as a continuum, whereas I kind of look at them as individual things. And while I think sometimes they can be related, I think you can also experience them as isolated experiences.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you adding that because you prompt me to want to add something else and tell me what your thought or reaction to this is, Caroline, which is that our relationship to burnout, compassion fatigue, and or vicarious trauma has everything to do with our own unique life experience. So we may experience them as part of a continuum, but we also, based on our own individual experiences, of trauma, if we've had them, is going to impact our relationship to any of those three things.
I would agree with you, Paul.
Okay. Okay. I really appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important to acknowledge that, because we can't say that, like, phase 1, you will now experience burnout. Phase 2, you will move into compassion fatigue. Phase 3, you have now sunk to vicarious trauma. It doesn't work that way, because no two of us are the same, and no two of us have had the same experience.
I was also thinking of burnout, like, doesn't necessarily need to be connected to your interactions with the clients. It could be like the way your agency is or something like that,
Yes.
and burning out from more of the office politics as opposed to the interactions with the client.
Yes, because the client, your interaction with the clients might be kind of a resiliency factor.
Right.
But it's other things that, yes, thank you so much. And again, that speaks to how unique our wellness and self-care plans need to be, because they have to be tailored to our needs. Brandy, don't lose your thought. I'm going to go to Margalie, and then I'll come right back to you. Go ahead, Margalie, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hello. So I just wanted to, for me, when it comes to decompressing and all these things, just the remedy for me is to unseen, uncheck, and unplug. So unseen, not as the eyes, but unseen. Get away from the scene, right? Uncheck my availability and unplug. I think that outside of work, everything, we come home and then we get on social media.
Yeah.
That's another stressor in itself, or whatever. So unplugging the phone, right? Sometimes you got to unplug from that cousin that calls you every day, every week, complaining and the world is an awful place, unplug for all of the negativity, and just a sense of, and be with yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
For
And
me, that's important. And it works in terms of not feeling, stressed or overburdened.
Yeah, and I want to underline two things in what you're saying before we go to Brandy, which is you're identifying, again, the ability to set and maintain a boundary, and to feel that you have the agency or the control to do that. And it's critical to feel that you have that in order to be able to set the boundary, right?
Yeah, that's exactly taking back control.
Yeah.
That's exactly, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're going to go to Brandy, and then again, a number of people have put some things in the chat. Go ahead, Brandy, the floor is yours.
I almost don't know where to start. So in my area in Northern New York, it's very scarce for peer support, especially in targeted case managers. And for my clinic, citizen advocates, there's 2 of us. I'm the one peer, and then there's one TCM. And it's for our whole area. And there's sometimes I travel to the town on either side of me and work at those clinics as well, because it's hard to find people who can, be peers and stuff. And I think burnout was one of the first things I learned in my role here. I was warned about it a lot, because there were times where I was working 55 to 60 plus hours a week, doing overnights, and then getting up and working 8 hours. And I had to limit myself. Okay, so just because they need the help, I can't be the one to do it every overnight. So I was like, my boundary was, I'm only going to do 1 overnight in a row, never 2, because then I can't function, and then I have to drive an hour home. So I think just making sure that you are aware of, like, there's certain things that, like, within your company itself, you can't help it, and it shouldn't all fall on one person. And I think it's really, it's kind of hard to not want to be that one person that steps up when no one else is really doing it. And it was challenging for me to kind of step back and put my boundaries out there and be like, I can't say yes every single time.
Yeah. And again, I want to underline, because I want to link that to what Margalie said. You can't say yes every time, and I won't say yes every time is a form of taking control, setting a limit, and being respectful. And again, I want to acknowledge some people have more agency in being able to set boundaries and other people don't, and you really try and find the balance between those two. But Brandy, thank you for sharing that story, because you realized if you didn't do that, there wasn't going to be anything left for you.
This role I take as a peer support specialist, especially since I do have lived experience, it
Yeah.
is very, very rewarding. And I would hate for it to kind of get in the way of that, like the job itself to get in the way of that. So it was really important for me to listen to what my coworkers were saying, because I was so eager as an early peer. I wanted
Yep.
to be the people pleaser. I was appreciative of being given the opportunity, but I was like, I will not last a year if I keep this up.
Yep. Yep. And thank goodness you said that to yourself. And I'll tell you why. Because there are people, and there could be people in our learning community who've had this experience, that there are people who don't last that year. And it's not their failure, it's that they realize this situation is not one within which is going to give me the opportunity to support my own well-being. And they realize, after possibly becoming ill, that maybe the setting is not the right setting for them. And again, that is a hard place to find oneself. But I have been in learning communities focused on this topic where people have said, like, yeah, I got sick and I had to leave my job. I couldn't continue to do that work. My hope is that all 69 of us together, that won't be the experience for anybody here. That you will be able to define a plan, take the actions, and maybe the action is, maybe this isn't the right setting or situation. So a couple of the many things in the chat, but Lindsay writes, no, in capitals, is a complete sentence. Jennifer writes, the gift of no, exclamation point. Sonia writes, I recently understand that you can't pour from an empty cup. And again, how wonderful to have that realization. My cup is empty. And if my cup is empty, I've got nothing to pour. Learning how to tell yourself no and to stand by it is a self-discipline. That is the hardest thing to do. Absolutely, Leroy. And for some people, it is harder than others. Again, and I'm thinking of Caroline as I say this, based on our individual and unique experience. And somebody said this earlier, and Brandy, I'm not sure if it was you or if it was somebody else, but somebody said, I want to be a people pleaser. That's where I came from as a provider. I wanted all my clients to be happy. And you know what? I don't have control over that necessarily. Holly, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that, those three things we're a lot more likely to experience those things if we've had our own trauma in the past, because it lowers that tolerance threshold.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Holly. And what I think you're talking about is the idea that susceptibility, where if we are under stress, or if we have experienced trauma, or if we're experiencing traumas at the moment, we are more susceptible to those things because our defenses are lower. Is that, am I getting it? Okay. And again, back to what Caroline said earlier, that is unique to each one of us. We all have our own sort of history and experiences. Eula writes in the chat, the sad part is too many agencies take us for granted, learning to say no more. Yeah, and And it really, and this also goes back to something that Caroline identified. Sometimes it's not the client work. Sometimes it's the organizational settings. Sometimes it's the organizational politics. And again, navigating that is part of the work too, because we want to survive that as well. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to walk us through. Well, we know what the golden rule is, many of us. Many people ascribe to this: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. So basically, treat people the way you want to be treated. Simply stated. Well, if we ascribe to that, it's possible that we may have expectations of our coworkers or our patients or our clients, that they may say good morning to us consistently, that they may show us respect, they may behave like adults, that they may do what they are told to do, and that they say thank you, and many other expectations. Now, I just wanted to mention this because what's the problem with expectation? Yes, I see Eula nodding. Go ahead, Eula. Do you want to unmute and comment on that? What is the problem with expectations?
Nobody lives up to them.
Yeah, they can lead, and Lindsay just wrote they lead to resentments. Leroy, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I was going to say it's disappointments. You know, we have expectations so high that when we don't necessarily meet those expectations, those disappointments are like the lowest valley you can go.
Yep. And I'm going to repeat what you said and tell me if I get this right, Leroy. Disappointments are the lowest valley you can go. Did I get that right? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you. So the reason I wanted to mention this, folks, is that it's normal as a fellow human being to have those expectations. The reality is, based on what our three colleagues have just said to us, is that they're not always going to be met. And it's not necessarily personal to us. It may be where the person is. It may be where our colleague is. But expecting them could create those disappointments, could set an impossible standard for people to meet. And it's still our responsibility to take care of ourselves. And Christina writes, I always remind myself, don't wait to be asked, don't expect to be thanked. Caroline writes, expectations are based on other people's actions on which we have no control. Sabi writes, standing firm against administrative power heads are extremely difficult because they do not respect no for no. That can be a serious reality that sometimes people actually live with and experience. Not a problem, Brandy. Not a problem. Thanks for letting me know. Not a problem. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. Now, I'm very curious if anybody is familiar with this book. Has anyone ever read this book, Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle? I will just read, though, before anybody comments on the book, that Taifei wrote, disappointment is not always a guarantee with expectations, but resentment is if they are not met. Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes people meet our expectations. Sometimes we are treated with respect. Sometimes those expectations are met. But again, the idea that we want to be aware of them and still focused on our self-care and wellness. Again, as was said, we cannot guarantee what other people may or may not do. Is anyone, if you're familiar with this book, Burnout, type an F in the chat. If you're unfamiliar with it, type a U. Jordan writes in the chat, I recommend Dr. Rami. Jordan, if you're able to unmute, would you like to, it looks like many people are unfamiliar with this book. Jordan, are you able to unmute and say anything about that resource?
Dr. Ramani Dursolva. I'm a fan of her. She's I'm certain she's Indian. She might possibly be Hindu. I love her theories on narcissism. She goes through and mentions scapegoating for her any person's children. There's the concept of mini me, to have a mini me. There's quite a few concepts of narcissism. It's been I think maybe a month or two since I've read it. I did read an entire textbook related to factory work, but anyhow, narcissism, the idea of grandiosity and being cheap, just ideas of that.
Got it. Got it. And you found this a supportive resource for yourself?
Oh yeah, I love Ramani's work. I enjoy reading it. Facebook, YouTube, there's videos out there. Soft White Underbelly, that's another to see exposed narratives that people are divulging, to really understand certain backgrounds like Skid Row. I mean, if you want a firsthand or like a secondhand consultation with these people to understand where they're coming from, that's a great resource.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jordan. And if you'd be willing, could you just type the name of the author back in the chat one more time, just so it's at the bottom so people can see it again? Thanks. Thank you so much, Jordan. So I'm going to share my screen again, and this book, and again, I'm not making a pitch for this book, but what I can tell you is when I read this book, this idea that these two authors, two sisters, conceptualized resonated with me. And I want to underline that because, again, my self-care plan may be very different than your self-care plan. And I gravitate toward things that resonate for me. And my sense is you will gravitate toward things, hopefully, that resonate with you. Just like Jordan is sharing this example with us of a resource that is resonant for Jordan. So again, try and trust that. And I wanted to share a particular element from this book that actually made sense and may help underline why some of these strategies can be very effective. So in this book, they identify something that they call the stress cycle. So in this instance, the uninterrupted or the completed stress cycle starts with the stressor. We have a reaction, an emotional, physiological reaction to the stressor, which in this particular case, the reaction is flight, fight, fawn, or freeze. This is the reaction in this case, flight. Getting back to a place of safety, reconnecting with one's community and sharing the narrative of the experience, integrating the experience, and then going forward in life. This is what they conceptualize, these two authors. They conceptualize as the completed stress cycle. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute because I want to underline something here. And Jordan, thanks for typing Dr. Vasula's name back in the chat. Thank you so much. What I want to underline in regard to this stress cycle is there's nothing caught or held on to in what they're describing as this natural stress cycle. The stress occurs, the emotional and physiological reaction happens, there is a physical reaction, a return to safety, communication about what happened, and then the ability to go forward. So there's not a traumatizing impact here. The stressor occurs, the person moves through the cycle and goes forward. Okay, so there's nothing held on to in what they're describing as this stress cycle. Okay, I just wanted to underline that. I'm going to share my screen again. They suggest that in the modern day, stress and chronic stress in particular is dealt with very differently. So in this modern day stress cycle, they identified the stressor, which may be related to, because I think they were talking about stress at work, to an unhappy supervisor. There's the emotional and physiological reaction. Now, if you remember what the next bullet was, or the next bubble was, what was the next bubble in the uninterrupted stress cycle? And if you remember what it was, type it in the chat. It was one of those 4 basic reactions. If you remember which one of it was, type it in the chat from the previous slide. Yes, running away, Leroy and Nick. Yes, it was flight. So there was a strong physical reaction, and you'll see it here. But what they suggest is that in the modern day, that's not always possible. That we end up having to stay where we are. We don't get to a place of safety and are able to discharge the stress. And we are caught in a circular loop. So let me underline something here. What they're suggesting is that through this circular loop of being exposed chronically to stressors without the discharge of the stress, is that there's an accumulation, that there's a clogging and a holding on to. Okay? Now, they suggest, I'm going to share my screen again, that there are a lot of reasons why in the modern world this happens. And some of it they suggest is that the fact that we live in a modern world where there's chronic stressors and they're always going on. And clearly people had stressors in the past as well. But in the modern world, there's an increase of the chronic nature of it. Also social appropriateness. We can't necessarily jump up and run out of the room if we feel the need or desire to do that. And sometimes it's safer to not react, because reacting could actually cause a problem. It could actually increase the danger. And the problem with that is this accumulation and then being kind of dragged under by what's accumulated. Yes, excellent. Yes, eustress, successful, hypostress, not enough, bored, hyperstress, too much stress, and distress. And Jordan, absolutely, thank you for sharing that, because what we're really talking about here is we're talking about distress and the accumulation of distress. Now, they suggest, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, these 2 sisters have composed, and again, there's nothing earth-shattering here, but what they've composed is they've composed a list of strategies that can help release this stress in the stress cycle. Okay? None of these are going to be anything that are going to be new to anybody in this learning community. This is simply a review. But my question to you before I share this list that they composed and put in the book, again, based on research, research shows that these strategies are the strategies that most effectively relieve stress. Does anybody want to take a guess and put it in the chat of what the #1 strategy is? The one that evidence actually shows is most effective at relieving stress. Well, Tracy writes flight, and I don't think you mean a vacation. Breathing, meditating, breathing, laughing. Okay. Sex, no, that was not one of them. Exercise, bingo. Physical, and again, physical exercise. Anything that gets your heart rate up. So shopping, remove oneself from the stress if possible. Absolutely, Paula. And again, yeah, go ahead, Caroline. Caroline is unmuting. Go ahead.
The reason I was thinking it was exercise is because it would sort of replicate like a flight, like running away from it. So even though you couldn't necessarily, you're not being chased by a lion, but if you're exercising, it's kind of like getting that adrenaline up and everything, and it's replicating that sort of situation.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you'd say that, because there's another book. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it. It's called Waking the Tiger. And I'm not remembering the author's name at this particular moment. I've read that book, but it speaks to what you're saying about how physical activity is connected to the flight response. And it causes a freeing of accumulated or clogged tension and stress. So absolutely. So I'm going to just briefly review this list, and then we're going to hopefully have a little bit of time to engage in a couple. Yes, it's Peter Levine. Yes, Peter Levine. Has anyone read that book in the learning community? It's a very good book. Yes, it's called Waking the Tiger. And again, it's the idea of this accumulated physical, the physicalization of emotional, and I'm going to use a word that Jordan shared with us, because Jordan, it's very accurate. It's the physical accumulation of emotional distress and how it's held in the body. And if the body can release it, it can then move forward. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. So drum roll, please. The number one strategy, we've got the preview for it already, is physical activity of some sort. It doesn't have to be intense physical activity, but some physical activity. Also, connection and positive social interactions. Now, those connections and positive social interactions can also occur at work, but hopefully not exclusively at work. And Tracy puts in the chat, I enjoy walking. Tracy, I enjoy walking too, and it is part of my self-care and wellness sort of activity toolkit. Laughter. And I love this picture. And I say this every time because this picture reminds me of a few people in my life who I actually laugh this deeply with together. Now, I once said in a training, I don't know if these people are a real family or if they're models, but they do give a great impression of what it is to be together and to laugh. And it's probably no surprise to any of you who have come to the learning community on a regular basis how much I enjoy and benefit personally from laughter. And I've never tried a tanning bed, but and Margalie writes, I travel and revel in other cultures. That sounds very appealing. Sleep, meditation, and rest, which again, this could also include breathing. It says inhale and exhale here. Creative expression. This is actually a big one for me in a variety of small ways. I don't think I have any particular huge talent in this area, and I do get a lot of pleasure from the things that I do make or build. Affection, and that affection can come from beloved creatures that share our homes with us, or being out in nature and seeing creatures, and also being affectionate with those we love and care about. And sometimes for some people, sometimes the ability to shed tears, to actually release tears of joy, tears of sadness. And it's also important to acknowledge that if someone is frequently tearful, that can be a sign of that they could be experiencing some sort of depression, could be experiencing some other kind of distress that might need attention. Sometimes tears, though, can be very releasing for people. Yeah. And one of the major things I think to take away here is this idea, keeping in mind, folks, that wellness is not really a state of being, but a state of action. And I want to particularly underline that for two reasons. One is that it's going to be a unique set of actions for each one of us, because no two of us manage our stress the same way. And that just kind of thinking about it may not necessarily address any accumulated stress. It can be part of a process, but that process does need to, at some point, turn into some sort of action. Charmaine writes, my job is having a laughing therapy exercise. I saw it today and will be teaching my third session, chair yoga exercise, and an African Latin exercise class starting in December to help relieve stress and wellness at Brooklyn Hospital Center. Yeah, and again, these are actual things that actions that can be taken, classes in Brooklyn. Sometimes I make myself cry, and I believe that tears can release so many emotions. Also, tears are very natural for me. And again, depends on who you are, depends on what your experience is. For some people, tears can be a release. For some people, they can be a significant sign of further distress that may need to be addressed. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And what I'm going to ask everybody to consider at this particular point is, do you know what this is a picture of? And if you know what it's a picture of, and many of you who've been in learning communities with me before will know exactly what this is a picture of and why I'm showing you this picture. But yes, lost connection for a minute. No problem. It is a picture of the Grand Canyon. I show it to you because I have been there 11 times. I'm considering my 12th return to the Grand Canyon. So I'm kind of making a plan to go there again. And I'm showing it because one person may look at this and say, it is a desert hole in the ground, and I would never want to go there. And I will go there as many times as I possibly can. It is a place that I find very healing. It gives me a tremendous amount of physical activity, so much so that I swear I will never do it again when I go, because it's that exhausting to hike down and then hike out. And it's a unique thing specifically for me. Julie, I can't recommend it highly enough. I took this picture. This is the south rim of the Grand Canyon, and I've been to the south and the north rim. This is also my dog. If you know the breed of this dog, type it into the chat if you want to guess. Sadly, there's no prize, but you can certainly take a guess. Jordan, it looks almost like your dog. I'm not sure what kind of dog you have there, but it looks a little bit like your dog. But if you know what kind of dog this is, it is not a Jack Russell. And I mentioned to you earlier, I'll tell you if nobody guesses it. I also told you that I like to take apart, I like to fix clocks. And I'm showing you this because, again, wellness and your three pictures may be very different than my three pictures. It is not a terrier. It is not a rat terrier. It is not a brindle. It is a tricolor, actually. All right. I promise you before the end of our time together, if nobody guesses, I will tell you. So your self-care and wellness plan will be unique to you and to you alone. What I'm going to invite us all to engage in now is what I call taking a pause. If you have been multitasking, and again, you may have needed to during this learning community conversation, but if you have been multitasking, if there's one moment where I can invite you to not multitask, it's this very moment. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, and some people call this box breathing, but what I'm going to invite us all to do is just to engage in a very brief breathing activity, which I've titled Taking a Pause. And let me explain to you, and then we'll do it together. Taking a pause is simply taking a breath in and pausing, and then exhaling and pausing. And what I'm going to ask that we do in our own time, and when you've completed it, type the letter Y in the chat. I'm going to do this with you. But what I'm going to ask you to do is take 3 breaths in the pause fashion. So you're going to take a breath in, you're going to pause. You're going to let the breath out, you're going to pause. And you're going to do that 3 times if you wish to. So I'm going to do it along with you. And when you've finished your 3 breaths, just type the letter Y in the chat. So I'm going to do it with you now. Everybody will do it in their own time because everybody breathes differently, but let's begin. Okay. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is from this place of simply taking 3 breaths together as a learning community. I'm going to ask you, type 1 word in the chat that describes how you feel right now. There's no right or wrong. It's just whatever you feel. So a word that describes how you feel right now. And I'm going to type a word in too. And again, I just want to acknowledge that was taking 3 paused breaths together in our learning community. And I'm going to share my screen again and just simply invite you to consider that you can pause and start over again at any time. And I'll just throw that out there as a consideration that you can pause between clients, and maybe it's more than 3 breaths, but that was 3 breaths. This breathing technique is not new. It's probably been around for, probably since people were breathing. But I throw it out there for you to consider because it is a way to create calm in a fairly quick way. So I just throw that out there for you to consider as what we again call a micro activity that you can choose to engage in. Another one that I'll just throw out for your consideration is what we call focusing your attention. You can focus your attention on your body. You can start by sitting quietly and calmly feeling your feet planted directly on the ground, and then scanning from your feet up through your entire body to the top of your head if you're holding tension anywhere. And if you are, if you find that you're holding tension anywhere, I don't know about you, but for me, my biggest place of holding tension is my shoulders, my back, and my neck. So whenever I do a focus of attention on my body, that's usually where I find the tension, and I try and breathe into that place and just release the tension. You can also focus on your thoughts. What are you thinking right now? What's on your mind? Is there something that's troubling you? Does it keep coming back to you? Can you allow yourself to let that thought go for at least a moment or two so that you can have some space away from it? And you can also focus on your emotions. What am I feeling right now? Am I happy? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I sad? What are the emotions that I'm feeling right now? And just pay attention to them. So these are 3 opportunities to focus that you can also employ. You can also ask yourself, and this is another type of focusing, you can ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? And if you answer yes to any of these, you can get yourself something to eat. You can figure out what you need to do to manage the anger. You can reach out to somebody, or you can rest. Now, I want to acknowledge, because remember, we're living in the modern world. We may not be able to address the need immediately, but if we find, I'm feeling kind of lonely, you may not be able to do anything about it right now, but you can tell yourself, I acknowledge that that's what I'm feeling, and I will take an action when I'm able to do it. And then you can follow through on that. So you may not be able to immediately gratify hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. You can acknowledge it, and you can commit to taking care of that need when you actually can. Keep in mind that your self-care, your wellness is really going to be the key to being effective with your patients, your clients, your colleagues within your organization, and also in your personal life. So acknowledge and don't lose sight of the fact that when you sit across from people who have significant needs, have been experiencing trauma, could be experiencing trauma right now, or maybe live with historic or intergenerational trauma, when you hear their stories and you provide care to them, it has an impact on you. Also, raising your awareness about where you physically experience stress in your body, back to that physical component of it. If you're stressed out, where do you feel it? Where does it live? I told you where it lives in me, but where does it live in you? And how does it impact your interactions or reactions with others? I don't know about you, but just sharing an example. If I'm stressed out, I start to give one-word answers. And I start to be very short in my communications with people. And that's a sign that I have an unmet need. Also, keeping in mind that do not do this work alone. As much as you can, reach out to your supervisor if you have a supervisor that you connect with. Reach out to trusted colleagues if you don't have that. Do not sit alone in this work. And the idea, and somebody mentioned this as one of the possible activities that relieves stress. It truly is talking it through with somebody else, either one person or sometimes group discussions, being in this learning community together, being able to put into words what your experience is. And when possible and as needed, sometimes setting the boundary is I'm taking time away. I'm going to take a vacation if you can. And then some organizations, some programs have employee assistance programs, paid vacation, or paid sick time. Not everybody has those benefits. If you do, the question to ask yourself is, are you using them? If you have a need, are you allowing yourself to use these benefits and to get the help and the support that you actually need? And the idea of pursuing outside connection and relationships outside of work that actually add to and fulfill your needs. So keeping that in mind too. You don't want everything to be work focused. And one additional thought before I thank you and give you the evaluation link is these are words from Bill W., one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is actually found in the Alcoholics Anonymous AA Big Book. And this is a quote: "You can't think your way into right action, but you can act your way into right thinking." And I wanted to share this because it struck me that it was very relevant to the idea that wellness is not so much a state of being, but a state of action. And our actions impact our thinking and our feeling. And self-care and wellness, again, it's a unique set of actions and a unique process for each and every one of us. So before I share the final slide, I just want to say thank you so much for making the time to be here and for participating in this learning community conversation. And my hope is that we will see each other in future learning communities. Have a wonderful and a safe weekend. And I hope that that there will be some joy and some laughter and some self-care activities that will support you this weekend. So thank you again so much, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. My colleague Clyde Frederick is going to put the link in the chat. I'm going to share the last slide that has the QR code that you can scan. And please complete that evaluation. And once you've completed it, we're all done. And I hope I'll see you again in the future. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.